The sun was setting over the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Chicago. The city had been tense for days, ever since strange signals were detected coming from deep space. Scientists and military officials scrambled to make sense of it all, but no one could have predicted what happened next. A massive fleet of alien ships descended from the sky, their sleek metallic forms glinting in the fading light. They didn't communicate or ask permission, they simply arrived, claiming Earth as if it belonged to them. Among the aliens was a group known as the Varnock Empire. They were tall, with skin that shimmered like polished silver, and they carried weapons far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Their leader, Captain Reinach, stood at the forefront of the invasion force. He was a proud warrior who had conquered countless worlds, and he saw Earth as nothing more than another notch on his belt. To him, humans were primitive creatures, unworthy of respect or fear. Reinach's soldiers moved quickly, setting up forward bases near the outskirts of the city. They chose a dense forest as their starting point, believing it would provide both cover and resources. As they worked, some of them laughed openly about how easy this conquest would be. "Their weapons are useless against us," one soldier said, holding up a captured human rifle. "Look at this thing, it's ancient," another chimed in. "They'll beg for mercy before we even fire a shot." But not everyone shared their confidence. General Carter, a grizzled veteran of many battles, watched the situation unfold from a secure command center miles away. He knew the odds were stacked heavily against humanity. The Varnock had shields, energy weapons, and technology that made conventional warfare seem laughable. But Carter also knew something else, something the aliens hadn't considered yet. Humans weren't just fighters, they were survivors, and sometimes survival meant thinking outside the box. That's where Lieutenant Daniel "Danny" Hayes came in. Danny was part of an elite sniper team assembled specifically for situations like this. Known for his calm under pressure and deadly accuracy, he was exactly the kind of man you wanted by your side when things got tough. His squad included 3 others: Rachel Bennett, Jake Monroe, and Emily Dawson. Each brought unique skills to the table, making them a formidable unit. Rachel was the strategist. She had a knack for reading people and predicting their moves, which made her invaluable during missions. Jake, on the other hand, was a natural-born hunter. Growing up in the wilderness had taught him how to move silently and strike without warning. Then there was Emily, the tech expert. If it involved wires, circuits, or code, she could fix it or break it, depending on what was needed. When news of the alien landing reached them, the team didn't waste any time. They grabbed their gear and headed straight for the forest, knowing they'd have to act fast if they wanted to gain the upper hand. The plan was simple: observe, analyze, and strike when the moment was right. They set up camp several miles away from the Varnock base, using the trees and underbrush to conceal their presence. From their vantage points, they could see everything: the patrols, the equipment, the arrogance etched onto every alien face. For hours they waited, watching and listening. The Varnock moved around freely, completely unaware that they were being watched. Some of them joked loudly about how pathetic humans were. Others inspected their surroundings with bored expressions, clearly unimpressed by the forest. None of them suspected that danger lurked nearby. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the area, Danny gave the signal. It was time to act. Rachel adjusted her scope, focusing on a high-ranking officer standing near a communications hub. Her breathing slowed as she steadied her aim. When she pulled the trigger, the sound was barely audible, a soft crack followed by silence. The officer crumpled to the ground, dead before he even realized what had happened. Panic erupted among the Varnock. Soldiers scrambled to figure out what had gone wrong, shouting orders and pointing weapons in random directions. That's when Jake stepped in. From his position deeper in the woods, he took out 2 more targets in quick succession. One was an engineer working on a piece of machinery, the other a scout patrolling the perimeter. Both fell without a sound, leaving the invaders confused and disoriented. Meanwhile, Emily worked her magic behind the scenes. Using a small device she'd built herself, She hacked into the Varnock surveillance drones. Within moments, she was feeding false data to their systems, creating phantom images of movement in areas where no one actually existed. This only added to the chaos, causing the aliens to waste valuable time chasing shadows. But the real masterstroke came from Danny himself. High above the scene, perched on a rocky ledge overlooking the base, he took careful aim at a critical piece of infrastructure, a communications relay tower. With one well-placed shot, he disabled it, cutting off the Varnock's ability to coordinate effectively. By the time dawn broke, the invaders were in complete disarray. Captain Renock, however, refused to admit defeat. Standing amidst the wreckage of his once orderly operation, he dismissed the attacks as lucky shots. "These humans are amateurs," he growled, pacing back and forth. "We'll find them soon enough and show them what true power looks like." What he didn't know was that Danny's team was already planning their next move, ready to prove him wrong in the most devastating way possible. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, the snipers packed up their gear and melted back into the forest. They left no trace behind, save for the bodies of their enemies and the lingering feeling of unease that now hung over the Varnock camp. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the invaders felt something they hadn't expected: fear. And though they didn't realize it yet, their worst nightmare was just beginning. The morning after the first attack, the Varnock soldiers were on edge. The forest, once a place of quiet mystery to them, now felt like a trap. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made them jump. Captain Renock tried to maintain order, barking commands and urging his men to stay focused. But even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. He had always prided himself on being a fearless leader, but now doubt crept into his mind. Who were these humans? How could they strike so quickly and vanish without a trace? Back in their hidden camp, Danny's team regrouped. They knew they had rattled the Varnock, but they also understood that this was only the beginning. The aliens wouldn't retreat easily, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Time was not on their side. Rachel pulled out a map and spread it across a makeshift table. "We hit them hard last night," she said, pointing to the locations where they'd taken out key targets. "But they'll adapt. We need to stay ahead of them." Danny nodded. "They'll come looking for us now," he said, his voice steady. "And when they do, we'll be ready." Jake leaned against a tree, cleaning his rifle. "Let's hope they're as dumb as they look," he muttered with a smirk. Emily rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. Even in the middle of chaos, Jake's dry humor kept morale high. The team spent the day preparing for the next phase of their plan. Emily worked tirelessly to modify their equipment, adding extra suppressors to their rifles and upgrading the WIME decoy devices she'd used to trick the Varnock drones. Rachel studied the enemy's movements through binoculars, noting patterns and weak points in their defenses. Jake scouted the surrounding area, marking potential ambush spots and escape routes. And Danny? He stayed sharp, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. By late afternoon, the Varnock began moving deeper into the forest. Captain Renock had ordered a sweep of the area, determined to root out the snipers who had humiliated him. His soldiers formed tight groups, sweeping through the trees with weapons drawn. They moved cautiously, their arrogance replaced by caution. But no matter how careful they were, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Rachel noticed the change immediately. "They're smarter now," she whispered to Danny, her eyes glued to her scope. "But they're still predictable." Danny adjusted his position, finding a new vantage point from which to observe the enemy. "Predictable is good," he replied. "It means we can still outthink them." As night fell, the Varnock set up temporary camps scattered throughout the forest. Their glowing energy lights pierced the darkness, making them easy targets. Danny's team waited patiently, letting the invaders settle in before making their move. When the time came, they struck with precision. Rachel fired first, taking out a sentry standing near one of the camps. Her shot was silent thanks to the suppressor Emily had installed. The alien collapsed without a sound, his comrades none the wiser. Jake followed up moments later, targeting another guard stationed farther away. Each shot was deliberate, designed to weaken the Varnak's numbers without alerting the others. Emily played her part too, using her device to create false signals that drew some of the soldiers into traps. One group chased what they thought was movement in the bushes, only to stumble into a patch of tripwires Jake had set earlier. The wires triggered small explosions, nothing lethal, but enough to send the aliens running in confusion. Meanwhile, Danny took aim at a fuel tank near one of the larger camps. When the tank exploded, flames lit up the night sky, sending the Varnak into a panic. Captain Reinach heard the commotion and rushed to the scene. By the time he arrived, the fire had spread, consuming supplies and equipment. His soldiers milled around aimlessly, unsure of what to do. "Find them!" Reinach shouted, his voice shaking with anger. Find whoever did this. But finding the snipers was easier said than done. Danny's team vanished into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only destruction and fear. The Varnak searched fruitlessly for hours, combing the forest for any sign of their attackers. But the humans were ghosts, blending seamlessly into the environment. By dawn, exhaustion and frustration had taken their toll on the invaders. Some argued that they should abandon the forest altogether and focus on urban areas instead. Others insisted on staying, convinced that they could crush the resistance if they just kept pushing forward. Captain Reinach listened to both sides, his pride warring with his growing sense of unease. Finally, he made a decision. "We will press on," he declared, "but this time I will lead the search personally." Unbeknownst to him, Danny's team was already planning their next move. They had anticipated Reinach's stubbornness and knew he wouldn't give up easily. Rachel suggested setting up a fake base, a decoy designed to lure the Varnak into a trap. "We make it look real enough to draw them in," she explained. "Then we hit them hard while they're distracted." Emily loved the idea and got to work creating holographic projections to enhance the illusion. Jake volunteered to lay down more traps along the route the Varnak would likely take. And Danny? He focused on finding the perfect spot to ambush Reinach himself. If they could take out the captain, it might break the Varnak's spirit entirely. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the team finalized their preparations. They moved quietly, working together like a well-oiled machine. Despite the danger, there was a sense of purpose among them. They weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for everyone back home, for the people who depended on them to hold the line. When everything was in place, Danny gave the signal to wait. Patience was key now. The Varnak would come eventually, driven by desperation and arrogance. And when they did, Danny's team would be ready. Hidden in the trees, watching and waiting, they knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time in days, they allowed themselves a small measure of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could win this war. The Varnak soldiers trudged through the dense forest, their glowing armor clashing with the natural shadows of the trees. Captain Reinach led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the terrain. He had spent hours studying maps and planning this search operation. The humans were clever, he admitted to himself, but they couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later they would slip up, and when they did, he would be ready. Reinach's confidence was partly for show. Deep down, he felt a gnawing unease. Every step deeper into the forest seemed to tighten an invisible noose around him. His men were tense too, jumping at every sound, their weapons trembling slightly in their hands. They weren't used to this kind of warfare. Silent, unpredictable, relentless. Back on other worlds, their battles had been loud and chaotic, filled with explosions and screams. But here it was different. It was personal. Back in their hidden camp, Danny's team prepared for the next phase of their plan. Rachel laid out a detailed map, marking the positions of the fake base and the traps they had set. "They'll take the bait," she said confidently. "They're desperate enough now." Jake nodded, tightening the straps on his backpack. "Desperate people make mistakes," he added with a grin. Emily finished tweaking the holographic projector, ensuring the illusion of a human outpost would look convincing. "Let's just hope they don't get suspicious before we spring the trap." Danny stood apart from the group, gazing into the distance. His mind was racing, thinking about all the possible outcomes. If this worked, they could deal a major blow. To the Varnock, if it didn't, well, failure wasn't something he wanted to dwell on. He turned to his team. "We stick together no matter what happens," he said firmly. "If things go south, we fall back to the fallback point. Got it?" Everyone nodded, their faces grim but determined. As night fell, the Varnock approached, the decoy base. The holograms flickered to life, creating the illusion of tents, vehicles, and even moving figures patrolling the area. To the aliens, it looked real enough to investigate. Captain Rhynock signaled for his men to spread out, forming a loose perimeter around the supposed human encampment. Some of them exchanged nervous glances, unsure if this was another trick. But Rhynock silenced their doubts with a sharp glare. "Move forward," he ordered. "We'll flush them out." Inside the real camp, Danny's team watched the scene unfold through scopes and cameras. Emily monitored the Varnock's movements using hacked surveillance drones, feeding live updates to the others. "They're taking the bait," she whispered, excitedly. Rachel adjusted her rifle, aiming at one of the lead scouts. "Time to give them a warm welcome," she murmured. One by one, the traps began to spring. Jake's tripwires triggered small explosives that sent bursts of smoke and noise into the air. The Varnock scrambled, unsure where the attacks were coming from. Some fired blindly into the trees, wasting ammunition and further disorienting themselves. Meanwhile, Rachel picked off isolated targets, her shots silent and precise. Each kill struck fear into the hearts of the invaders, who were beginning to realize they were walking into a nightmare. Emily kept the holograms running, maintaining the illusion of a bustling base. She also manipulated the Varnock's communication systems, broadcasting false orders that caused confusion among their ranks. "This is almost too easy," she muttered under her breath, though she knew better than to let her guard down. Captain Rhynock, however, refused to retreat. Despite the growing chaos, he pressed onward, convinced that breaking through the defenses would reveal the truth. He barked commands, rallying his men to push deeper into the trap. But the deeper they went, the more tangled they became. Trees loomed overhead like silent judges, and the darkness seemed alive with unseen threats. Danny waited patiently, perched high in a tree overlooking the main path. He had chosen this spot carefully, knowing it offered the best view of the battlefield. Through his scope, he watched Rhynock march forward, oblivious to the danger closing in around him. Danny took a slow, steady breath, lining up his shot. He didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Timing was everything. Suddenly, Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "They've found one of my traps. Looks like they're on to us," Danny cursed, under his breath. "Fall back to phase 2, he replied quickly. "Rachel, cover our exit. Emily, disable those holograms." The team sprang into action. Rachel provided covering fire, forcing the Varnock to duck for cover as her bullets whizzed past their heads. Emily shut down the holographic projectors, plunging the area into sudden darkness. Without the illusion to guide them, the aliens stumbled, blindly, their fear turning into outright panic. Jake detonated a series of larger traps, sending shockwaves through the forest that knocked several soldiers off their feet. Amidst the chaos, Captain Rhynock realized his mistake. The humans had outsmarted him again. Frustration boiled over into rage as he shouted orders, trying to regain control of his men. But it was too late. The tide had turned against them. Danny saw his chance. Taking careful aim, he fired a single shot that struck Rhynock's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. The alien captain cried out in pain, clutching his wound as his soldiers rushed to protect him. For a moment, the entire invasion force froze, unsure of what to do next. Danny's team regrouped swiftly, retreating deeper into the forest. They moved silently, leaving behind only echoes of destruction. As they disappeared into the shadows, Rhynock struggled to his feet, his pride wounded as much as his body. He stared into the darkness, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he growled softly. "This isn't over." But for now, the humans had the upper hand. Back at their hidden camp, Danny's team caught their breath, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. They had dealt a serious blow to the Varnock, but none of them celebrated. They knew the fight was far from finished. The aliens wouldn't give up easily, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Danny looked at his team. "Good work," he said simply. "But we can't afford to relax. They'll come back harder next time." Rachel nodded, reloading her rifle. "And we'll be ready," she replied. Jake grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Let 'em try," he said with a chuckle. Emily smiled faintly, already tinkering with her equipment. "We've got a few more tricks up our sleeves." For now, the forest was quiet, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the battle resumed. The Varnock had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make the same mistake twice. And Danny's team? They were prepared to meet whatever came next head-on. The Varnock soldiers retreated from the forest, their once confident steps now heavy with frustration and defeat. Captain Reinach limped at the rear of the group, his wounded shoulder throbbing with every movement. The humans had humiliated him, not just once but twice. His pride was shattered, and worse, his faith in his own invincibility had been shaken. He clenched his teeth as he replayed the events in his mind. How could such primitive creatures outwit his highly trained warriors? It made no sense. Back at their temporary base, the Varnock regrouped. Morale was low, and arguments broke out among the soldiers. Some demanded a full-scale assault on the forest, while others suggested abandoning it altogether. "We're wasting time and resources," one officer growled. "These humans are ghosts. We'll never find them." Another countered, "If we leave now, they'll only grow stronger. We have to crush them before they become a real threat." Reinach listened silently, his sharp gaze cutting through the chaos. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and commanding. "Enough," he snapped. "This is not over. These humans may be clever, but they are still fragile. They bleed like anyone else." He turned to face his men, his silver skin glinting in the dim light. "We will adapt. We will learn their tactics, and we will destroy them." Meanwhile, Danny's team rested briefly in their hidden camp. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but there was no time to relax. Emily worked tirelessly, repairing damaged equipment and upgrading their gear. Jake sharpened his knife, his eyes distant as he thought about the battles ahead. Rachel studied maps, plotting potential escape routes in case things went wrong. And Danny? He sat quietly, staring into the fire, his mind racing with possibilities. "They'll come back smarter," Rachel said, breaking the silence. "They won't fall for the same tricks again." Danny nodded. "That's what I'm counting on," he replied. "But we've got something they don't. Experience fighting in this environment. We know this forest better than they ever will." Emily looked up from her work. "I can create some new decoys," she offered. "Something to mess with their sensors again." Jake smirked. "And I can lay down more traps. Let's see how they handle a few surprises." Danny smiled faintly. "Good. Keep thinking ahead. That's how we win." As the sun set, the Varnock launched their counterattack. This time they came prepared. Their scouts moved in smaller groups, using advanced scanning devices to detect heat signatures in motion. They swept through the forest methodically, leaving no stone unturned. But despite their efforts, they found nothing. No camps, no supplies, no sign of the snipers who had tormented them. What the Varnock didn't realize was that Danny's team was always one step ahead. Using thermal blankets and sound-canceling gear, the humans masked their presence, blending seamlessly into the forest. They watched silently as the aliens passed by, oblivious to the danger lurking just feet away. Rachel spotted an opportunity first. One group of Varnock scouts had wandered close to a narrow ravine, a perfect ambush point. She signaled to the others, and they quickly took positions along the ridge above. As the aliens entered the ravine, Jake triggered a trap, causing rocks to tumble down and block their path. The Varnock froze, unsure of what to do next. "Now," Danny whispered sharply. The snipers opened fire, their shots precise and deadly. Rachel targeted the scout leader, taking him down with a single bullet. Jake focused on the engineers carrying scanning equipment, disabling their tools before they could react. Emily hacked into the Varnok's communication system, flooding it with static and false orders. Chaos erupted as the aliens scrambled to defend themselves, firing blindly into the trees. Danny stayed focused, picking off key targets one by one. His aim was flawless, each shot striking true. From his position high on the ridge, he could see the panic spreading among the invaders. For the first time, they were truly afraid. Captain Renock arrived moments later, his face a mask of fury. "Hold your ground," he shouted, rallying his men. "Don't let them break you." But even he couldn't deny the fear creeping into his own heart. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning and vanishing like shadows. He gritted his teeth, vowing to end this nightmare once and for all. The battle raged on for hours, the forest echoing with the sounds of gunfire and explosions. Danny's team fought fiercely, pushing the Varnok deeper into the ravine, but they were careful not to overextend themselves. When the enemy began to regroup, the humans slipped away, disappearing into the darkness. By dawn, the Varnok had suffered heavy losses. Their equipment was damaged, their morale shattered. Captain Renock stood amidst the wreckage, his expression unreadable. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt doubt, not just about winning, but about whether this war was worth the cost. Back at their camp, Danny's team tended to minor injuries and restocked their supplies. They were battered but alive, and that was enough. Emily patched up a cut on Jake's arm while Rachel brewed coffee over a small fire. Danny paced back and forth, his thoughts consumed by what lay ahead. "They'll change tactics again," he said finally. "Next time, they'll bring everything they've got. We need to be ready." Rachel nodded. "We'll keep adapting, too. That's our strength." Jake grinned despite his exhaustion. "Let 'em bring it. We'll be waiting." Emily looked up from her work, her expression serious. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Their reinforcements might arrive soon. If they call for backup, we'll be outnumbered." Danny stopped pacing. "Then we make every shot count," he replied firmly. "We hold the line until help arrives or until they give up." For now, the forest was quiet. The Varnok had retreated once more, licking their wounds and planning their next move. But everyone knew the lull wouldn't last long. The invaders would return stronger and angrier than before, and when they did, Danny's team would be waiting. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, the humans prepared for whatever came next. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. Together they had proven that humanity wasn't as weak as the Varnok believed. And as long as they stood united, they had a chance, even against overwhelming odds. The Varnok had changed. Gone was the arrogance that once defined them. In its place was a cold, calculated determination. Captain Renock paced back and forth in their makeshift command center, his mind racing with plans. He refused to admit defeat. Not here. Not now. The humans had proven themselves cunning, but Renock believed they were still just animals backed into a corner. Sooner or later they would run out of tricks, and when they did, he would be ready. To counter the snipers, the Varnok deployed new units, counter-sniper teams equipped with advanced detection systems. These soldiers carried scanners capable of detecting even the faintest heat signatures and sound waves. They moved in tight formations, sweeping through the forest with ruthless efficiency. For the first time since the invasion began, Danny's team felt the pressure mounting. The aliens were adapting, and it was getting harder to stay hidden. Back at their camp, Emily worked frantically to upgrade their equipment. She added extra layers of thermal shielding to their gear and modified their weapons to emit less noise. "We can't rely on staying invisible anymore," she said, her voice tense. "They're getting better at finding us." Rachel nodded, studying a map covered in markings. "Then we fight smarter," she replied. "We use their strength against them." Jake sharpened his knife, his usual humor replaced by grim focus. "Let 'em come," he muttered. "We'll hit them where it hurts." Danny stood apart from the group, staring into the distance. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. He knew the next clash would decide everything. If they failed, the Varnok would gain the upper hand, and humanity might lose its chance to fight back. As night fell, the Varnock launched their new offensive. Their counter-sniper teams spread out across the forest, using their scanners to pinpoint potential hiding spots. The humans watched silently from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. When the aliens passed close to one of Jake's traps, he triggered it, sending a flurry of debris into the air. The distraction worked perfectly, drawing several soldiers into a narrow clearing. Rachel took the first shot, targeting the lead scout. Her bullet struck true, dropping the alien instantly. Danny followed up with 2 more kills, picking off engineers, carrying critical equipment. Emily hacked into the Varnock scanners, feeding false data that caused confusion among their ranks. Chaos erupted as the invaders scrambled to defend themselves, firing wildly into the trees. But this time, the Varnock didn't retreat. Instead, they regrouped quickly, forming defensive positions around their remaining forces. Captain Reinach led the charge, his wounded shoulder wrapped tightly in bandages. He shouted orders, rallying his men to push forward despite the danger. "Find them!" he roared. "Burn this forest to the ground if you have to!" Danny's team fell back, melting into the darkness as the Varnock advanced. They couldn't afford to get pinned down, not with the enemy so close behind. As they retreated, they set new traps and decoys, buying themselves precious time. But the aliens were relentless, refusing to give up the chase. By dawn, both sides were exhausted. The Varnock had taken heavy losses, but their numbers were still overwhelming. Danny's team regrouped in a secluded part of the forest, catching their breath and assessing their options. Supplies were running low, and injuries were starting to pile up. Emily patched up a deep cut on Danny's arm while Rachel brewed coffee over a small fire. Jake leaned against a tree, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. "They're not giving up," Rachel said finally, breaking the silence. "If anything, they're getting stronger." Danny nodded, his expression grim. "That's what I'm counting on," he replied. "They're stretched thin now. If we can hit them hard enough, we might break them." Emily looked up from her work, her face pale but determined. "We need to end this soon," she said quietly. "Our reinforcements are still days away, and we can't hold out forever." Jake smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Then, let's make sure they remember us." Danny turned to his team, his voice steady despite the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "Here's the plan," he began. "We lure them into the canyon. It's narrow enough to funnel them into a kill zone, but wide enough for us to escape if things go wrong. We'll set traps along the way, slow them down, and pick them off one by one." Rachel studied the map, nodding slowly. "It's risky," she admitted, "but it could work." Emily adjusted her goggles, already thinking about how to sabotage the Varnock's equipment. "I'll rig some explosives near the entrance," she offered. "That should keep them busy for a while." Jake cracked his knuckles. "And I'll cover the rear. Let's see how they handle a little surprise." As the sun rose higher in the sky, the team prepared for their final stand. They moved quickly, setting traps and laying explosives along the path leading to the canyon. Each step was deliberate, each decision carefully weighed. By the time they reached the canyon itself, the Varnock were hot on their trail. Captain Reinach led the charge, his eyes blazing with fury. He had lost too many soldiers, too much pride to turn back now. When his scouts reported the humans heading toward the canyon, he smiled coldly. "This is it," he growled. "This ends today." What Reinach didn't realize was that Danny's team had turned the canyon into a death trap. As the Varnock entered, Emily detonated the explosives, collapsing part of the entrance and trapping the invaders inside. Panic erupted as the aliens tried to retreat, only to find their path blocked. From their vantage points above, the humans opened fire, their shots precise and deadly. Rachel targeted key leaders, taking them down with lethal accuracy. Jake focused on disabling their vehicles and equipment, ensuring the Varnock couldn't escape or call for backup. Emily hacked into their communication systems, flooding them with static and false orders. And Danny? He stayed focused on Reinach, tracking the captain's every move. When the dust settled, the canyon was littered with alien bodies. Captain Reinach lay wounded on the ground, his armor battered and his spirit broken. Danny approached him cautiously, his rifle trained on the alien leader. Through a translator device, he delivered a chilling message. You laughed at us because you thought we were weak. But weakness isn't measured by technology, it's measured by arrogance. Reinach stared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. But even he couldn't deny the truth in Danny's words. Slowly, reluctantly, he raised his hands in surrender. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Back at their camp, Danny's team caught their breath, their bodies weary but their spirits unbroken. They had proven that humanity wasn't as fragile as the Varnock believed, and that sometimes the greatest weapon wasn't technology, but the will to survive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red, Danny looked at his team. We held the line, he said simply. Now let's finish this. The canyon was eerily quiet after the chaos of battle. The Varnock survivors huddled together, their once proud armor dented and scorched. Captain Reinach sat slumped against a rock, his wounded body trembling with pain and exhaustion. His mind raced with thoughts of failure, shame, and disbelief. How had it come to this? He had conquered countless worlds, faced armies far larger than these humans, yet here he was, defeated by a handful of snipers. Danny's team regrouped at the edge of the canyon, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. They were battered but alive, and that was enough. Emily checked her equipment one last time, ensuring everything was secure. Rachel reloaded her rifle, her hands steady despite the fatigue in her arms. Jake leaned on his weapon, his usual smirk, replaced by a look of quiet pride. Danny stood apart from them, staring down at the defeated aliens below. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. We did it, Rachel said softly, breaking the silence. We actually did it. Danny nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on Reinach. For now, he replied. But this isn't over until they leave Earth for good. Captain Reinach raised his head as Danny approached, his silver skin glinting faintly in the fading light. He tried to stand, but the pain in his shoulder forced him back down. Danny stopped a few feet away, his rifle still trained on the alien leader. Through the translator device, he spoke again, his voice firm and clear. You came here thinking, we were weak. You thought you could take what you wanted without a fight. But you underestimated us. Reinach clenched his teeth, his pride refusing to let him bow completely. You may have won this battle, he growled, but your world is still no match for the Varnock Empire. Danny shook his head unimpressed. Strength isn't about weapons or numbers, he said. It's about heart, and you'll find plenty of that here on Earth. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Reinach lowered his gaze, his shoulders sagging in defeat. He signaled to his remaining soldiers, ordering them to lay down their weapons. One by one, the Varnock complied, their glowing armor dimming as they surrendered. Danny watched silently, his fingers still resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle. He didn't trust them, not yet. Back at their camp, the team tended to their injuries and restocked their supplies. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but there was no time to rest. Emily worked tirelessly, repairing damaged gear and setting up communication devices to contact General Carter. Jake brewed coffee over a small fire, handing cups to Rachel and Danny. Not bad for a bunch of amateurs. Huh? He joked, though his voice was tinged with weariness. Rachel smiled faintly, sipping her drink. Amateurs who just outsmarted an entire alien army, she added. Danny sat quietly, staring into the flames. His mind was racing with thoughts of what came next. The Varnock might have surrendered, but reinforcements could still arrive at any moment. If that happened, humanity would need more than just a sniper team to survive. We've bought some time, he said finally. But we can't afford to relax. Not yet. Emily nodded, her face pale but resolute. I'm sending a message to command, she said. They need to know what happened here and what's at stake. Danny gave her a small smile. Good work, Em. Keep us connected. As night fell, the forest grew quiet once more. The Varnock prisoners were secured in a makeshift holding area, guarded by a few of Danny's allies who had arrived to assist. Reinforcements were on the way, but they wouldn't reach the forest for another day at least. Until then, the team remained vigilant, taking turns keeping watch. Captain Rhynock sat among his men, his thoughts heavy with regret. He had always believed in the superiority of the Varnock Empire, but now he wasn't so sure. These humans, primitive, fragile, outnumbered, had proven themselves capable of incredible resilience. For the first time in his life, he questioned whether conquest was worth the cost. The next morning, General Carter arrived with a contingent of soldiers and scientists. He listened intently as Danny recounted the events of the past days, his expression shifting between awe and concern. When Danny finished, Carter placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done something remarkable," he said. "Something no one thought possible." Danny shrugged modestly. "We just did our job, sir." Carter turned his attention to the Varnock prisoners, studying them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. After a brief discussion with his advisors, he made a decision. "We'll offer them a chance to negotiate," he announced. "If they agree to leave Earth peacefully, we'll spare their lives, but if they refuse—" He left the sentence unfinished, his tone leaving no room for doubt. When the proposal was presented to Rhynock, the alien captain hesitated. Pride warred with survival in his mind. Finally, he nodded slowly. "We will withdraw," he said through the translator. "But this is not the end." Carter met his gaze evenly. "Then consider this a warning. If you return, we'll be ready." With the negotiations complete, the Varnock began preparing to leave. Their ships descended from orbit, collecting the surviving soldiers and supplies. As they departed, Rhynock glanced back at Earth one last time. There was no hatred in his eyes now, only respect. Back in the forest, Danny's team gathered around the fire one final time. They were bruised, tired, and emotionally drained, but they had accomplished the impossible. Rachel broke the silence first. "What happens now?" she asked. Danny looked at each of them, his expression softening. "Now we go home," he replied, "and we keep fighting, for as long as it takes." Jake grinned, raising his coffee cup. "To Earth," he said, "and to us." Emily and Rachel joined in, clinking their cups together. Danny smiled faintly, his gaze drifting toward the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but for now, humanity had held its ground. And that was enough. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of gold and pink, the team packed up their gear and began the journey back to civilization. Behind them, the forest stood silent, bearing witness to the courage and sacrifice of those who had defended it. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in days there was hope, a fragile, flickering flame that refused to be extinguished.